Well now, every day on my way to work, I used to pass this house, and it was such a beautiful house. There was just something about it. I can't quite describe it, but I'll try. It was sort of set back a little from the road, so that when you went past it, you didn't really notice it. Do you know what I mean? It had a kind of quietness and a reservedness and a privacy about it. But when you did start to notice it, you start to see all these beautiful architectural details, as if it had been put together over a long time, but so wonderfully. It was such an eye-catching house, and it looked so spacious too. And most days I used to pass it, and I used to think, that looks like a real dream house, you know, a beautiful house. But we lived in our house, and whoever it was lived in their house. Until one day, that is, it came up for sale. I saw a for sale sign on it. Well, I said to my wife that it was up for sale, and we agreed that it would almost certainly be way more than we could afford, but we thought we'd just look into it, you know. She'd like the look of this house too, and we went there, and we looked around. The estate agents showed us around, and we couldn't believe it. Well, it was selling for just about what we could afford. If we sold a few things in our own house, we could just about manage it. And we asked the estate agent, why is that? There's a lot of space in this beautiful house. It was every bit as good on the inside as it was on the outside. And he said, well now, and he started to look just a little bit shifty, and he said, well, the thing is, it comes with kind of sitting tenants, as you might say. They got the leasehold right above the top floor. There's an attic, and there's a couple that live there. And down below the kitchen and below the wine cellar, there's a really old basement, and there's another couple living in there. But, he said, they've got their own exits and entrances, and the chances are you'll never see them there. Nobody's ever complained about them. They're really very quiet, and they're no trouble at all. Well, when my wife and I heard this, we wondered about that, and we talked it over, and we said, do we really want to share our house with these other people? I mean, it's a big space, but we've never even met them. And my wife said to me, honey, what if we wanted children or something? You know, there's strangers in our house, and, well, maybe we could get rid of them, but the long and the short of it was, the house was beautiful, it was irresistible, we bought it anyway. Well, for the first 3 months, we were real happy, doing DIY, you know, all the painting and putting up a few shelves and that kind of thing, and unpacking our stuff, and it was a lovely house. It had an air of peace, and we were real happy. But, yeah, after the first 3 months, it was supper time. My wife turned to me and she said, honey, you know, I've been thinking about these sitting tenants that we've got right up in the roof and right below the basement. I wonder if we could maybe, you know, well, maybe talk to them and encourage them to move off, you know, so that we could have the whole house to ourselves. You know, we don't know what they're like. We've never met them. And I said, well, honey, they're real quiet. We haven't seen any hide or hair of them, you know, nothing at all. But she was quite insistent, and I kind of understood her point, so I promised that the next day after dinner I'd go down and try and tackle them first. And, well, they happened to be called Mr. and Mrs. Ab, which, as she said, were really odd names. So after dinner, I went down and I went below the kitchen, and there was the wine cellar. It was real nice, but it was some time, you know, before I could find on the floor a trap door. And it was kind of odd, old-looking wood. Not like the rest of the floor at all. I had a mat over it as well. And once I managed to lift it up, ooh, it was dark down there. I mean, real dark. A Stygian gloom, what I can only describe, started to fall out from it. It was so dark. And then I tried to put my foot on the first step, and it was kind of crumbling, old stone slabs. It wasn't a proper staircase at all, never mind carpet or wood paneling or anything like that. Well, I went down gingerly. It was really, really dark. And I had to feel my way along the wall, all the way. Oh, when I got to the bottom, it was earth. It wasn't flooring at all. And there was a really dim light over there. And then I saw that it was, well, it was a bonfire in our house. I mean, it was just a a fire somebody'd lit, and it was smoking. I mean, it looked under control. It had rocks around it, but it was just a fire. I mean, a fire, no stove. And by the light, as I walked nearer and got closer, I saw a figure crouching over it. And a really sort of, one of those really healthy hippie positions, you know, all kind of crouching and squatting that you can't do if you've got normal knees, you know what I mean? and I saw that the figure was female, and I mean, she did have something on. She had a bit of fur around her middle, but the rest of her was, she appeared to be naked. All apart, that is, from a sort of fur covering. She had kind of fur over her skin, and while wearing her suit, she was not unattractive. Well, I said to her, I said, clearing my throat, I said, Mrs. Ab? And she turned to me, and she said, who, you? And I said, Mrs. Ab, I'm the new owner of the house, so my wife will live above your heads. Is Mr. Ab home? I'd really like to have a conversation with you about your tenancy down here. And she got up in the firelight, and I could see her outlined against the flickering flame. And she came right up to me, and she said, Ab out, he hunted. You, me, we mate. And I was horrified, of course, and I just said, Mrs. Ab, we've only just met. Whoa, hang on a minute here. But she wasn't having any of that. She was quite a strong and muscular woman, and she kind of grabbed me by the back of the throat, and it was then that I smelled her amazing musky scent. And in a matter of no time, before I even realized what was happening, we were doing as she had suggested by the light of the fire. Well, later on that evening, after we finished what we were doing, I went back up to mine and my wife's bedroom, sort of dripping bits of earth and twig and stuff like that. I got into bed. She'd been asleep for some time, and the next morning at breakfast, she said to me, "Honey, did you see the Abs? Did you have a talk with them?" And I said to her, "Yes, honey, I did. Well, I mean, to be strictly honest, Mr. Ab was out, but I did meet Mrs. Ab, and I really don't think we're going to be having any trouble with them at all. I think she's very nice, charming, in fact, and I'm sure he is too. It'll all be fine. I really don't want to ask them to leave. There'll be no trouble. They're real quiet." And she said, "Well, if you're not going to ask them, I will." And to which I replied, "All right, honey, you do that. Just you do that. Just go down and see what you think of them." Well, the next day after dinner, my wife went down to the basement. I showed her where the trapdoor was so she didn't have to look for it, and after that I didn't wait up. I just went to bed. Well, it must have been about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I was aware that she was getting into bed beside me, and I smelled a kind of musky scent, which I half recognized. I didn't say anything, of course, and the next morning at breakfast, well, how could I mind? It would have been ridiculous after what had happened to me, but I did say to her, "Well, honey, did you see the Abs?" And she replied, "Well, to be honest, sweetheart, Mr. Ab was there, and Mrs. Ab happened to be out, and I do see what you mean. They're charming people. At least he's charming, and I'm sure Mrs. Ab's charming too. And they're not going to be any trouble at all, are they really? Let's just leave them alone." So we left them alone. But a few days later, she came up to me, and she said, "But honey, this other couple right upstairs in the attic, we can still do with a little, I mean, we've got lots of space, but what if we had a really big party with like loads of guests, like if we wanted to invite everybody we knew and put them all up? I mean, Mr. and Mrs. Meadow, I mean, that's an odd name, isn't it? I mean, why don't we, go and ask them about maybe moving?" And I said, "Well, why don't we go together this time?" She agreed. And so we went up there after dinner. And, it was some time before we could find in the ceiling this thing. It was a door, a trap door, but it was made out of some shiny, sheeny metal like I've never seen before. It was really amazing technological stuff. And when we eventually found something to open it with, this long pole with some magnetic hook on it or whatever, when we opened it, this amazing, really safe-looking stepladder just slid out straight onto the floor. It was unbelievable. And this kind of light was coming through. Well, we went up, I went up first, and she went up after me, and we came out into this amazing room, and there were this couple there, and they said to us, "Welcome, we have much to show." And we were just amazed. Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Meadow, it must have been, but that's what we thought, and they were just astonishing. They were wearing long silvery robes, really almost entirely similar, only slightly differently shaped, and he was ever so slightly taller than her, and his hair was just a little bit shorter. But basically, they looked like twins almost, and they had this amazing spiritual expression and really clear eyes, and the things they had to show us were unbelievable. I mean, the whole place was full of incredible experiments going on, and beautiful artworks, huge sculptures of stuff, and they showed us their telescope through which we saw wonders of the universe, and showed us incredible geometric shapes with philosophical concepts in them, and we realized just how big the universe is, and how wide and wonderful the world is, and how incredibly fantastic loads of science is, and how the beauty of maths, and also how very small and insignificant we were in relation to all that, and how dumb it would be to ask these people to leave our house. I mean, how petty is that in the great grand scheme of things? So we agreed to leave Mr. and Mrs. Meadow alone. Well, now after that, we lived there very, very happily. Well, once every couple of weeks or so, I or my wife would go down to the basement and visit Mr. or Mrs. Abb, whoever seemed appropriate, and our own relationship was, I have to say, only enriched by this. And once a month, or every couple of months, both of us used to go up and see Mr. and Mrs. Meta, and I would say have a conversation, but it was more like being enlightened or spiritually taught or something. And it was really amazing. We were really happy. They never saw each other, and we were kind of an intermediary, if you like. Very happy, that is, until, well, nothing ever lasts forever, does it? Nothing that good. Especially when an idiot's involved. I came home one day from work to see them, all five of them. We'd never been together before in the same place, out there on the sidewalk, outside the smoking remains of our beautiful house, with just stuff that they managed to rescue on the pavement. And Mr. and Mrs. Abb were arguing. Mrs. Abb was saying, "Abb's fault, left the torch unattended." And Mr. and Mrs. Meadow were being really diplomatic and saying, "Oh, it must have been one of our experiments going on with the apparatus." And my wife was crying, and I just went up to them, and suddenly the penny dropped. But what I said was, "Listen, people, let's not argue about this. Really, there's no point in assigning blame or taking responsibility. This is all our house. Let's think of it that way." And why I said this was because it was slowly dawning on me that morning I had wanted some toasted waffles, and I hadn't really had the time, and I'd left the toaster on, and it almost certainly caught fire after I'd gone to work, and so the house burning down was almost certainly my own fault. I didn't mention that, though. What I said was, "Listen, guys, we've been really happy here. We are going to find a new house for all of us.